The rainforests of Indonesia, the last refuge of one of man's closest relatives, the orangutan. This orangutan's home is doomed, and when the patch of forest in which he lives has been felled, there will be nowhere for him to live or indeed to find a living. This magnificent animal is fighting for its very existence as more and more of its forest home is hacked away. The rainforests of Sumatra and Borneo, the only places where this ape now exists, are being chopped down at an incredible rate, usually for the timber, but sometimes to clear ground for rubber plantations and rice paddies. This big male senses that he has nowhere to go, and that the man with the axe waits for him and his kind at the base of every tree. He finds temporary refuge in a smaller tree. But that tree too is doomed. The name orangutan means man of the forest. Soon there may not be any forests left for the gentlest of all the great apes. "40 years ago, this part of northern Sumatra was covered with thick rainforest. Then came the timber boom. Japan was buying building timber in vast quantities. The axe and the chainsaw moved in to supply the market. The fact that the man of the forest, the orangutan, is being deprived of a home is only one aspect of a natural disaster. What the tree fellers are also doing is changing the climate in a way that could drastically affect their own lives. Rainforest like this actually creates the rains that fill the rivers, that irrigate the rice paddies, that feed the growing population. The gradual disappearance of the orangutan is perhaps a vision of our own future. The orang once occurred all over Southeast Asia. Today it's confined to forest areas in Borneo and Sumatra. Its best chance of survival is in the north of the Indonesian island of Sumatra in the Gunung Leuser Reserve. This has 2 orang rehabilitation centers at Ketambe and Bohorok. The Gunung Leuser Reserve, named after a mountain, covers 2,500 square miles. Just outside its boundaries, many of the trees have already gone. Inside the reserve, the undergrowth is impenetrable, a tangle of vines, ferns and bamboos. True jungle. The humidity is almost unbearable. A rainforest does exactly what its name suggests. It makes rain. Above the tangle at ground level, the trees often stand 150 feet tall. And in the trees live the men of the forest, the orangutans, the most arboreal of all the great apes. They're not at all at home on the ground. They're masters of the trapeze and high wire, even youngsters like this one. He's only about 3 years old. Although orangs appear to get fun out of such acrobatics, they've developed these amazing abilities in order to travel freely in the treetops. Making a tree sway in order to reach the next one is a standard procedure. They've even been seen to use a tool, a bent stick, to hook onto a tree that would otherwise remain just out of reach. Like the other great apes, the gorillas and chimpanzees, they're tailless. If gorillas are the ponderous heavyweights of the ape family and chimps the activists, then orangs are the good-natured pacifists. The great apes are our own closest relatives. Scientists say that the orangutans, Pongo pygmaeus, are the apes furthest from us, but there's still plenty about them we can recognize in ourselves. Perhaps their peaceful nature is due to the fact that orangs have so few enemies. An occasional clouded leopard may seize a youngster on the ground, but once in the trees, they're safe. They seem to be able to judge to the finest limits the strength of a creeper or branch that will bear them. Except on rare occasions. Orangs share very few domestic habits with their relations, the gorillas and the chimpanzees of Africa. But they do have this much in common. They build nests in the trees in which to spend the night. Orangs are loners. They never go around in large family parties. It's a miracle how a male ever finds a mate. His best efforts seem to lie in simply calling for one. Almost the only time 2 or 3 orangs are seen together is within a growing family. This immature youngster is still closely attached to its mother, who has another one, a very young baby, clinging to her breast. The larger of the 2 infants is about 3 years old. It'll soon be leaving its mother. She's still remarkably maternal towards it, even though the new baby must be taking most of her attention. The new arrival is quite helpless and can only cling. The 3-year-old will become fully independent in another year and sexually mature at 10. In the reserve, it may eventually live to the age of 30. Most days in the rainforest there's a downpour, if only for a short period. In the rainy season, it's monotonously continuous. The orangutans have an answer to this. Their wiry hair does offer a certain amount of protection. But when this is not enough, they try other methods. In this reserve, there are around 2,000 orangs, a fifth of the world total of perhaps 10,000 in the wild. It's a tiny population at great risk. Although copying the technique of its forest-dwelling relatives, this orangutan is very much not in the wild. He's captive, one of many throughout Indonesia, but nevertheless a potential recruit for the dwindling army of the wild ones in the forest. His days of captivity are over. At Bohorok Rehabilitation Center, they're training captive orangs to become wild again. Monica Borner and Regina Fry are two Swiss rehabilitation specialists who run Bohorok Station. Part of their job is to talk the owners of captive orangs into giving up their pets. This ape belongs to the crew of an oil drilling rig. For 40 years, it's been illegal to kill, capture, keep in captivity, or sell an orangutan. But no one has taken much notice of this law until recently. The oil crew got this orang as a baby. Now it has grown too big for comfort. Monica Borner did not even have to persuade them to give it up once they heard of the work of Bohorok Station. Though it's been kept chained up, it's in relatively good condition both physically and mentally. Many orangs that have been kept in small cages or even boxes suffer depressions and complexes that are similar to human mental illnesses. This orang obviously hasn't been shut up. It's ready to go into the box in which it will travel to Bohorok without excessive persuasion. Now it will learn to become a free-living orangutan. One of the problems that the Swiss scientists face is that many illegal orangs are kept as status symbols by high Indonesian officials. General Medelu, police chief for northern Sumatra, saw it as a question of setting an example when he gave up not only a 10-year-old female, but also a youngster from his private collection. While orangutans do quite well in captivity, this is no place for them if they can be free. Nowadays, even the world zoos have agreed not to take any more orangs from the wild. There are already enough in zoos to breed from. In the 3 years that they've been running Bohorok, Monica and Regina have rounded up over 50 orangs. Sometimes negotiations take weeks before they're able to drive away with another candidate for rehabilitation. They make it a rule never to pay, never to bribe, seldom to prosecute, except in the case of dealers who can sell a young orang for as much as £300 on the black market. Sometimes they have a lucky break. Monica spotted this cage in a garden while driving past. It contained a very young baby. The owner of the house had only just moved in. Orang and cage came with the property. He was very happy to hand over the baby, a female less than a year old. She was eventually named Mo for Monica. People find baby orangs irresistible. It's when they grow up that the owners grow tired of their pets, a situation by no means confined to Indonesia. Monica Borner would be the last to claim that she and Regina Fry are the only ones to round up illegal captives. These are wardens of PPA, Indonesia's increasingly active conservation organization. Many of the rescued orangs have been brought to Bohorok by their efforts. This is Suka, and he's 3 years old. Anyone who has worked with orangs soon discovers that they're all individual characters. It's a mile walk from the end of the road to the edge of the forest reserve. The turbulent Bohorok River marks the boundary. The two Swiss scientists are at the landing place to meet the PPA men with their new deliveries. Regina Fry is the first to greet Suka, then Monica Borner. Funds for Bohorok Rehabilitation Centre are provided by the Frankfurt Zoological Society. It's also backed by the Worldwide Fund for Nature, and much further support comes from the Indonesian government. The centre consists of 2 wooden huts, which the 2 girls designed and built with local timber and labour when they first arrived. This is the ranger post. Next door are the quarantine cages. At first it must seem that the new arrivals have merely exchanged one prison for another. But a 4 to 6 weeks quarantine period is essential. The orangs have been in contact with human beings and exposed to all the germs that afflict them. Orangutans can catch our diseases, including tuberculosis, pneumonia, and even polio. When allowed to roam freely in the forest, these could easily spread to the wild population. This handsome male, named Lubis, has already served most of his time in quarantine. The cages may appear unnecessarily strong, but orangs can escape from pretty well anywhere once they put their mind to it. They're even capable of using wooden planks as levers. They're very strong, but almost invariably gentle. Although these rehabilitation candidates seem to love human contact, they will soon have to learn to do without it. So for the present, they must remain behind bars as a first step towards living wild in the forests. Little Mo is so small she spends the night in a basket in the girls' living hut. The infants are always a problem. Mo, fortunately, is a healthy baby. Regina takes her into the forest for a climbing lesson. Sometimes the young orangs reach Bohorok in very poor shape. Monica nursed this one back to full health, only to see it die later, quite unexpectedly, of pneumonia. It seems ridiculous to have to teach even a very young orang how to climb. The instinct is born in them. But in captivity, their opportunities are so restricted, or they become so dependent on their owners, that they're often unwilling to try. Less than 1 year old, Mo is a very good climber. At first, the 3-year-old Suka was just the opposite. When Monica took him into the forest, he clung tightly to her. When she put him in a tree, he seemed terrified. He scuttled along the ground more like a young gorilla than an orangutan. Suka knew how to climb perfectly well, but much preferred the protection and reassurance Monica gave him. With further training, this situation was to change very soon. After new arrivals are put into the quarantine cages, vaccinations are given. They're rewarded with slices of sweet pawpaw. They're extraordinarily cooperative creatures, making little fuss about their polio and TB jabs. Occasionally, the girls have to seek outside medical help for their charges. They're zoologists, not vets, and a broken jaw calls for skilled surgery. This visit was the result of a curious incident. One day, the young orang Purba kept urging Regina to follow him down a certain forest path. When she finally did so, she found this ape, Olib, lying beneath a tree. Purba and Olib were close companions, and Olib had been missing for nearly 24 hours. He'd fallen out of a tree. His jaw was smashed. Regina took him to the doctor on a large rubber plantation some distance away. Olib submitted quietly to having his jaw x-rayed. Then clips were put in. Six weeks later, Regina brought him back to the surgery. He lay down quietly, without so much as a cry or a bite, to have the clips taken out. No anesthetic was needed. Olib was as good as new and was soon climbing his way towards freedom again. When handling such endearing animals, Monica and Regina must constantly remind themselves that their task is to free the orangs of human dependence as quickly as possible. And as we shall see, that can be a highly complicated task. There are always about 20 orangutans at Bohorok Rehabilitation Centre learning to be wild apes again. All but the very young live in the forest all day. In mid-afternoon, they come swinging in from all directions. Their objective is the feeding station, a series of cages, some with flat roofs, built in a clearing on a hilltop 400 feet above the scientists' living hut. Either Monica or Regina attends each feeding session so they can observe each orang's progress. Punctuality for meals is not looked for. In fact, it's a good sign if an orang turns up late. It tends to show less dependence on a free handout. Curious personality traits show up at the feeding station. These two are the same unusually dark colour. They're not twins, they're not even related, but they're always together, even in the forest. There's always milk, especially for the younger ones. This doesn't stop the bigger orangs from muscling in. In the general free-for-all, there's always one youngster that feels it's been cheated. This is Olib, the one who broke his jaw. His friend's gesture looks like sympathy, but it's more likely to be inspired by curiosity and a wish to play. Sometimes the rangers bring the milk in bottles to prevent the orang stealing it. It doesn't stop them trying. It's a pretty chaotic meal, but there's never any bad-tempered fighting. All the young get their share of milk before the second course is dished out. Today, Regina's on duty. She lets Suka out of his cage beneath the feeding platform. Suka is still too inexperienced to be allowed to roam freely in the forest all day. He just comes out at meal times. Suka has come a long way since the first few days when he refused to climb. The ape now drinking had been kept shut up in a large box by her captors. As a result, she has become emotionally disturbed and will probably never be self-reliant enough to return to the forest. She sits always alone. There's no doubt Suka will make it back to the forest. His present boisterous personality will probably change. Regina has seen extrovert youngsters like Suka before. In a year or two, they settle down. With young orangs, a foster-mother relationship is very important, but it can be overdone. If you asked anyone what they'd give an orangutan to eat, they'd probably say bananas. But bananas are seldom found in the kind of forest the wild orangs frequent. This diet of bananas is deliberately monotonous. It's an effort to persuade them to find more varied foods for themselves in the long hours they spend in the treetops. That's Suka looking after his own interests again. Just occasionally, a wild forest orang gate crashes the tea party. This male apparently does like bananas, at least as a change. Suka is beginning to practice swinging in preparation for the day when he's a wild male, like the banana raider. Such intruders are usually discouraged in case they begin to show dependence on the feeding station. Meanwhile, back on a branch, Suka plays with an older orang. The first arrivals have now had their fill and begin to make their way back to the forest. Being solitary animals, young orangs never get the chance to play like this in the wild. They certainly never meet Jack Russell Terriers like Regina's bitch, Vumi. The party lasts about an hour. When all the food has gone, Most of the guests depart for the treetops. Suka will be going back in his cage for the night. Some of the free-living youngsters linger around the feeding station. The Swiss scientists have been supervising this unique banquet every day for 3 years. It's their opportunity to check the health of every ape in their charge, as well as its readiness or otherwise for complete rehabilitation. Obviously, this lot have mastered the first essential, traveling through the canopy. There is one last basic requirement. They have to be able to build a nest for the night. Learning this starts very early, even for Suka in his cage. When he's eventually shut up for the night with another young companion, the rangers give them a pile of leaves so that they can practice nest building. Suka has a forceful personality and usually ends up with the lot. Sometimes one of the most difficult jobs for the rehabilitation centre is to catch orangs that will eventually end up in the reserve. A message has come that there's a wild male trapped in a timber concession 100 miles away. The orang must be caught and transferred immediately, since the trees there are coming down fast. Regina's plan is to isolate the orang in one large tree. Shaking and throwing down branches is the limit of aggression orangs normally reach, and only then when sorely pressed. Even his throwing is random, though it may seem to be deliberate. With the felling of the tree on the right, the orang is isolated. Now it's a question of laying siege. The homemade nylon nets are laid around the base of the tree. Regina demonstrates what she expects from her catching crew when and if the orang decides to come down. The tactic now is to try to get a man up above the ape. When the orang goes out on a limb, this is the climber's chance to get above him. A member of the catching team has reached a vantage point. He's isolated himself on a liana, a thick creeper, hanging from the main trunk. He knows there's a man above him and many men down below. Even in what must be a terrifying situation, this powerful young male doesn't struggle or fight. Regina has already given him a shot of tranquilizer. His magnificent tree will now be cut down like all the rest, like far too many other trees all over Borneo and Sumatra. He'll be taken to Bohorok and let go in the reserve, where he can live out his life secure from buzzsaws, axes, and the wholesale destruction by the timber companies. When a batch of orangutans is ready for return to the wild, they're released 15 miles from the station. That's enough to stop them finding their way back to become dependent again. The only way to travel is up, and often in the river, with the orangs in crates. The forest is far too thick for anyone to walk through it. Every 100 yards or so, the jungle closes in on one bank, and the party has to wade. The current is strong and the bottom is treacherously slippery. With an average of 15 crossings per mile, it's an exhausting process. The Indonesian helpers somehow manage to stay upright on bare feet. But on one journey, the porters didn't stay on their feet, and a mishap nearly cost the orang its life. By pure good luck, the crate didn't sink. The occupant, a 4-year-old called Ujok, emerged wet but remarkably composed. After the accident, Regina decided that they could no longer risk making releases by the river route. Another way would have to be found. They reached the release point without further trouble, and Ujok gratefully climbed a convenient creeper towards a new life of freedom. Some months later, when the next party of 8 orangs was ready, Bohorok Rehabilitation Center hired a helicopter to carry the orangs to their new home. There was nowhere to land close to the station, and so the apes had to be carried a mile or so outside the reserve. But first there was that river to cross. Orangs don't like water and decline to cross even a stream, let alone a river. Their fear of water is what makes the river such an effective boundary to the reserve. Regina reassures him, perhaps for the last time in his life, and the crossing is attempted again. The boat finally makes the crossing with the quietly terrified passengers. This time, it's Monica Borner who's in charge of the release operation. Her husband, a scientist who is studying the rare Sumatran rhino far out in the jungle, has cut and marked out a helicopter landing pad at the release point. These 2 orangs are the quietest of the party. The other 6 will travel in crates. To save room in the helicopter, this pair will fly on Monica's knee, but inside sacks for safety. Perhaps they feel more secure that way. It's an expensive undertaking to return just 8 orangutans to the forest. During the girls' entire 3 years at Bohorok, the total released has been fewer than 30. The other Sumatran centre at Kitambe, run by Dutch scientists, has achieved much the same results. In Borneo, there are stations at Sepilok and Kalimantan. But when the world population of an animal is down to a probable total of only 10,000, the release of every orang counts, provided that the primary forest in which the orangs live can be kept. In the reserve, this seems certain, if only because much of it is mountainous and unsuitable for logging. Monica Borner would say that the work of rehabilitation centres is very worthwhile, not only because they supplement shrinking wild populations, but because the attention they have attracted has made the illegal trading in captured orangs much harder. And this, arguably, is their greatest achievement for conservation. The apes have all been unloaded. Monica stays behind to make the releases and ensure that the orangs get away to a good start. The passengers are understandably getting restless, but they will soon have the freedom of the forest. One of the disappointing things about these releases is that it's impossible to follow the apes in their freedom. Even if a radio transmitter could be put on them, it would be impossible to follow their signals on foot. The jungle is too thick. And there's no way an orang could be persuaded to wear a larger transmitter traceable by an aircraft or satellite. So it's largely an act of faith, though some of the released orangs have been spotted close to the river. Perhaps a little sadly, Monica watches them for the last time before they disappear. Clowns, acrobats, first cousins to man. It doesn't matter how you look at these men of the forest, they're certainly contenders for the title of the most endearing animals on Earth. The work of rehabilitation centres like Bohorok has brought home not only what we are losing, but what we must do to keep the few orangs that are left. It is up to the governments of Indonesia and Malaysia, and the outside helpers they seem to welcome, to ensure that the man of the forest will still have a forest left to live in.
Our origins lie in the mists of Africa's past. Apes and humans are both primates and share the same ancestors. Yet evolution has followed many winding paths and blind alleys during the millions of years that separate the first primates from ourselves. Can we see our own beginnings in the gaze of the gorilla? The best place to peer into the dawn of the primate line is the island of Madagascar, where the modern descendants of the earliest primates still live in splendid isolation. The lemurs are descended from the first evolutionary experiments that were also to give rise to the apes over 50 million years ago. Just because they have been around a long time doesn't mean they are primitive. Many are highly specialized. These wide-eyed forest animals are nocturnal insect hunters. The ai is the most specialized of them all. Madagascar has no woodpeckers, and the ai has adapted to exploit the vacant niche. It mainly feeds on grubs beneath tree bark, but its sharp incisors enable it to gouge holes in bamboo and use its long, thin middle finger to scrape the pith from inside. The ai's incisors are continually growing to allow for constant wear. These same techniques can also be used to reach the milk from unripe coconuts while they are still on the bough. The ai is one of the rarest lemurs, driven close to extinction by human superstition. Many have been killed because they are thought to bring bad luck. These ghostly voices belong to the indris, the largest of the surviving lemurs. These calls help to keep the family together and defend its territory. Unlike the ai, the indris feed mainly on leaves. They pull branches towards them with their hands, equipped with a thumb that can touch the tips of the fingers. This opposable thumb is unique to primates. Because of its isolation and unique vegetation, the lemurs of Madagascar are only adapted to a very narrow range of conditions. Chifakas live among the Didiera forests in the dry south of the island. Chifakas are particularly threatened by the destruction of these unique forests for fuel and agriculture. Every branch is armed with cactus-like thorns. They have evolved the ability to leap from tree to tree without injury. Like most of the larger lemurs, they are only active by day and seldom come down to the ground. How they manage to avoid damaging their soft, leathery hands and feet is a mystery. Sifakas live in extended families, with a number of adults of both sexes caring together for their communal young. They have a complex set of calls where different sounds represent danger from the ground and from the air. Only ring-tailed lemurs live mainly on the ground. Living in tribes of about 15 individuals, they have an even more complex set of signals. They communicate with their tails, using them not only as flags, but as a way of spreading messages through the air. Rubbing them with scent from glands on their wrists, they wag them towards an opponent in what's known as a stink fight. In ring-tailed society, females are dominant to males. They spend their lives in the group in which they were born, while males move from one group to another. Glands under the tail also produce scent, which is used to mark the tribe's boundaries. Ringtails check branches and tree trunks periodically for scent markings and rub the glands under their tail against the bark. On the African mainland, primate evolution took a different but parallel course. Baboons have evolved the same tribal way of life as the ring-tailed lemurs, living like them more on the ground than in the trees. But baboon society is much more complex. The social structure is maintained not by subtle sense, but by facial and vocal signals. When two tribes meet at their common boundary, the conflict is organized and ritualized. Females and young keep well out of the way, leaving the males to do the fighting. Dominant males confront each other and make ritualized displays of aggression or submission. As abruptly as it began, the fight is over. Honor on both sides is satisfied, and the tribes resume their placid daily routine. Baboons eat almost anything, from roots and shoots to insects. They even eat meat, gazelles and goats, which they hunt in organized parties. The senior males and dominant females are saluted politely by their juniors, who present themselves for inspection as they pass. As society gets more complex, there is more for youngsters to learn. Young primates have a much longer period of dependency upon adults than most other mammals. They need to be educated. Young baboons are adventurous and inquisitive, especially the males. They learn by trial and error, supervised by a watchful mother. The males will leave the tribe when they grow up. Adult baboons prevent youngsters from eating unfamiliar food, but often curious juveniles discover new food items which gradually become incorporated in the entire troop's diet. The need to find a varied diet demands cooperation between individuals as well as intelligence. She continues to suckle her infant until the next one is born, often as long as 2 years later. The mother-daughter bond lasts throughout adulthood, and they often spend time grooming each other. But from time to time, a mother has to discipline her more unruly older offspring if they try to take liberties. Because of their adaptability, baboons have colonized an amazing range of habitats in Africa, from deep forest to open savanna. One habitat they have not invaded is above the snowline. But a closely related group of primates has mastered even this unpromising environment. Macaques are members of the same family as baboons, but their home is in Asia, not Africa. Japanese macaques are among the most northerly monkeys in the world. Their habitat demands especially adaptable behavior and intelligence. They forage for food in groups, feeding mainly on bark, with a few shoots and dormant leaf buds. They watch each other, so that individuals learn from the experience of the group. They used to spend the winter lower in the valleys, where the weather is milder. But pressure from the human population forced them to stay in the hills, even in the harshest of weather. Fruits, shoots and insects are so scarce during the winter in temperate regions that this may explain why most primates are found only in the tropics. But the macaques are intelligent enough to find a wide variety of food even in these desperate conditions. Grass roots and corms are a particularly nutritious food source, buried under the snow. They nibble at the snow occasionally. There is no free water to drink. A vital adaptation to the cold is a thick winter coat, which insulates the macaques from the worst of the weather. Mothers help their young, but despite their skills at finding food, there is barely enough nourishment to keep them warm in these bleak winter months. The macaques have discovered an ingenious way of reducing the amount of food they need to keep warm, that beats even a warm fur coat. Dotted among the mountains are volcanic hot springs, where they can take long, leisurely baths. This is a perfect example of how curiosity and experimentation has allowed the primates, including ourselves, to overcome the rigors of new or unsuitable environments. Among all primates, overcrowding can give rise to tension. The macaques, like their relations elsewhere, deflect the aggression by grooming each other. Basking in clouds of steam, they can survive the winter in relative luxury, exploiting geothermal heat while all around them the snow piles high. This region of volcanic activity extends south like a thread, connecting Japan to the Indonesian archipelago. These volcanic islands are home to a primate which bridges the gap between monkeys and the higher apes, including ourselves. the link between the monkeys and the higher apes is a group known as the lesser apes. Among them, the siamang, a type of gibbon. It lives high in the trees of the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra, rarely coming to the ground. The siamang is the largest member of the gibbon family. A large male can weigh up to 12 kilos. As the primates began to increase in size, they began to swing beneath the branches instead of balancing on top. The gibbons are absolute masters of the art. Coming to a river to drink, they avoid plunging in among the waterborne predators. Instead, they drink as they dangle, scooping up water with one hand. Like all primates, they have opposable thumbs. Without them, they could not maintain the grip on thin twigs. From the lemurs of Madagascar all the way up the primate line, this type of hand opened possibilities closed to other animals. Each pair of siamangs occupies a treetop territory. From its center, in the early morning, they sing a duet. The singing spaces out pairs in the forest and also helps to strengthen the bond between the pair. The acrobatic display of a siamang demonstrates its strength and ability to a potential mate, but it also contains an element of play and sheer exuberance. The siamang's shoulders are very mobile, and its arms are longer than the length of its body and legs combined. The hands form hooks from which to swing from one branch to the next, a form of movement called brachiation. They have to travel widely around their 40-hectare territory, visiting places where they have learned that a particular fruit crop will be ready to eat. Siamangs are monogamous, and the lifelong bond between male and female is very close. They spend most of their time in each other's company, avoiding other groups in the forest. The pair move together among the branches, exploring and learning the conditions of the trees they pass. It will take several years to pass this accumulated knowledge to their young. In Sumatra and nearby Borneo, the Orang-utan, the shy man of the forest, has taken the tree-living habit to its limit. Although they are competent climbers, they are much heavier than the gibbons. A mature male can weigh 90 kilos. 50-kilogram mother, carrying her baby, can hang confidently by one foot from a slender branch. She is able to use her toes to grip in the same way as we use our thumbs. This ability is essential when both hands are needed to gather food. Orangs have none of the natural grace of the siamangs. Sometimes branches break under their weight and they are unable to leap from one tree to the next. Orangs have solved the problem in an ingenious way, using the natural spring of a sapling to swing backwards and forwards until they gain the momentum needed to reach a handhold. They don't always succeed. Lianas make an easier pathway through the trees. Examination of orang skeletons reveals that many have broken their bones during the course of their life. Orang-utans are gentle creatures, especially when they are young. This has caused problems with their human relatives. The charm of a young orang makes it a very attractive pet. These youngsters are survivors of just such an experience. At a rehabilitation center in Sumatra, they are fed and looked after until they are ready to be released back into the forest. They're orphans, deprived of adult orang company, and more important, education. Their mothers were killed so that they could be captured. Now they have outgrown the cuddly stage and their human keepers have become bored or afraid of them. The lucky ones find the chance of a new life here at the center. The humanoid appearance of orangutans indicates that they are quite close to us in the family tree. Many of their gestures and some of their bad habits are surprisingly familiar to us. They diverged from the ancestral line relatively recently, just before the gorillas and the chimpanzees. A party of them sharing a durian fruit could easily be a group of children at a picnic. In the wild, orangs often spend an entire day feasting on a fruiting fig tree. The fruits of the Indonesian rainforest are varied. Durians, jackfruit, lychees, mangoes and figs. Occasionally, they will eat insects and birds' eggs. Though not quite as dexterous as humans, orangs are well equipped to manipulate their environment, handling and investigating everything around them. In the rainy season, their natural inventiveness is brought into service to find ways of keeping dry. In the wild, orangs build a nest out of vegetation in the crown of a tree for shelter every night. Young animals learn from their elders, adapting their techniques to take advantage of whatever they can find around them in the forest. In the Rehabilitation Centre, shelter is even more sophisticated. Climbing is an inborn skill, but it needs practice. For young orangs, practice is evidently a pleasure, and the forest is a huge natural gymnasium. The young orangs in the Rehabilitation Centre have become accustomed to the presence of humans and show no fear of the camera. The front of the lens is like a mirror. Behavior like this draws humans to the primates as to no other animals. We see ourselves reflected in their faces. Mature male orangs are twice the size of the female and develop fleshy cheek flanges. In the wild, they mostly lead a solitary life, avoiding other males. Females usually move through the forest with their offspring. In Indonesia, the rainforests are still being felled. Orangutans are being driven from their homes by the relentless advance of humanity. Young orangs were taken out of the forest to supply a demand for the pet trade. Tree fellers working in the forest soon learned that every young orang they could catch would be worth a month's wages. The gentle apes have no defense except to drop branches on their tormentors. On average, for every young orang removed alive from the forest, 12 others will die. Thousands have been sacrificed to supply the trade, in spite of the fact that it is now illegal to own or sell one in Indonesia or Malaysia. The orangutans are losing the last of their forest habitat outside national parks. When we move to Africa, the cradle of the human race, things are no better for our close relative, the gorilla. All gorillas live in a narrow band of forest stretching across equatorial Africa, and all these forests are under threat. These eastern lowland gorillas live in family groups ruled by a senior male. Their diet is very varied and seasonal. Like other primates, they need intelligence to learn where and when to find food, and how to exploit a good supply. The family wanders through the forest, feeding together and moving on. They never stay long enough in one place to strip out all the food plants. They don't need to move far in one day to find food. It's growing all around them. They travel too slowly to patrol the boundaries of their range, so they don't defend any territories. Each gorilla group may overlap with others. The big silver-backed male in charge of this family group takes special care where a road crosses their route. Roads can mean danger from human hunters, so he ushers the family across under his watchful eye. The black-backed junior males take their share of responsibility, but the silverback is overall leader of the group. He leads them on at a steady pace of about 3 kilometers per hour to the next feeding area. The group rests regularly along the way for the sake of its younger members. The rarest gorillas of all, the mountain gorillas, live in the remote mountains of Rwanda and Zaire. The male gorilla is much larger than the female because he has to compete with other males for control of the females in his harem. These conflicts are seldom violent, usually consisting of ritualized chest beating and charges. Young gorillas use up their energy by sparring under the gaze of their elders. Mornings and evenings are spent exploring and feeding, with a siesta in the middle of the day. Subordinate members of the group take their lead from the silverback. When he feeds, they all feed. When he moves on, they all follow. The group usually consists of a silverback male, 3 adult females, and their offspring, including blackback subadult males. Young males are tolerated until they reach sexual maturity, when they leave the group and lead a solitary life before setting up a harem on their own. Gorillas feed mainly on leaves and stems rather than fruits. As leaves are always in plentiful supply, they can afford to move around in a large party and feed together. The care they take of the youngsters in the group is returned by evident trust and affection. Young gorillas taste all the plants they come across in the forest, learning their life's diet by trial and error. Like baboons, they sometimes change the life of the group by introducing their more conservative parents to new foods. With supple fingers and opposable thumbs, they can reach the tenderest and tastiest parts of any plant. These hands, dried and pickled, are sold by poachers to tourists as souvenirs. When the morning's feeding is over, the gorilla family settles down, making comfortable nests for their siesta. When the family is at rest, their lazy rolling and cuddling, as well as the squabbling youngsters, make the gorillas seem even more like humans. This is why, to most people, killing them for any purpose seems so like murder. There is one other group of primates, the chimpanzees, which are even more closely related to ourselves. In a small surviving patch of forest on an island in West Africa, scientists have been studying their closest relatives in the animal kingdom, a community of chimpanzees. This is one of the last places where their behavior is almost entirely unaffected by humans. Although they are expert climbers, the chimps live mostly on the ground, climbing the trees mainly in search of fruit. Like baboons, chimps also eat meat, cooperating to hunt monkeys, pigs, and young antelope. Like gorillas, they know their part of the forest in great detail. Each community has its own territory, which it patrols regularly, watching for intruders and checking on the state of the food plants. As each fruit tree ripens, the chimps make use of it. But this particular community has developed a skill not shared by any other group of chimpanzees. It arose as an ingenious solution to an awkward problem. Every year the forest produces an abundance of nuts, but they are encased in hard shells, proof against the strongest teeth. The chimps have found the answer. They collect the nuts from the forest floor and take them to a clearing where they have assembled the tools they need. Using a convenient tree stump as an anvil, they crack the nuts with rocks chosen for the purpose. It's nourishing food, full of fat and protein, available to the chimps only because of their dexterity and intelligence. The technique is passed down from mother to child by demonstration and imitation. To achieve this degree of skill can take as much as 6 years' practice. Our fascination with chimpanzees is enhanced by the discovery that they share with humans 98.4% of their genes. They are more closely related to us than they are to gorillas. Their modes of greeting and their facial expressions are readily recognizable. Even their family structure is not entirely alien. They live in cooperative groups, several mothers and their children, led by a senior male to whom all the others defer. Chimps use another tool to gather termites. All over Africa, chimps use the same technique. It must be something they learned to do a very long time ago, passed down the family over many generations. After peeling a long stem of grass to make it flexible, they push it into the hole of a termite mound. Termite soldiers bite the stem in defense, and the chimp is able to lick them off without being bitten. Tools are not only used for feeding. At moments of high tension, chimps use sticks and stones as weapons. Not everybody finds chimpanzees so deeply fascinating. Some people regard them as just animals and seem able to exploit them with unfeeling cruelty. Here, on the beaches of Sierra Leone, a young African leads an infant chimpanzee among tourists from Europe. The baby's mother was almost certainly shot so that he could be captured. At this age, if he's well fed and cared for, the infant is probably intrigued, if slightly bemused, by the activity and excitement around him. By posing for photographs, the youngster will earn his owner a little money. Away from the beach, life is not so interesting. This infant chimpanzee was captured when its parents were shot by a cafe owner in Sierra Leone to attract customers to his establishment. At this age, they need their mother's constant attention to survive. It died soon after these pictures were taken. Looking into its terrified face, we might question the use we have made of the intelligence that brought us thus far on the journey from lemur to prime primate. Because chimps are so genetically similar to humans, their physiology is very close as well. This makes them ideal for medical experiments, which could never be done on humans. These two youngsters are doomed to suffer pain and confinement at the hands of their closest living relative. If their physiology is close to our own, what about the psychology? All the evidence shows that chimps share most human emotions, including fear and loneliness. There is escape from this nightmare for the lucky ones. These chimpanzees were rescued from a similar fate on the holiday beaches of Spain. Little Gamba has found a foster mother in the older female, Pepper. Gamba was rescued from a ship before he was sold into slavery, but as usual, his mother was killed when he was captured. Here, at Monkey World in Dorset, the nursery pen attracts great attention. It's where the orphans go until they are big enough to join the hurly-burly of the adult groups. Pepper is their universal aunt. She arrived in Dorset only a year ago, after a period as a beach chimp. But she knows some of the other orphans because she met them at the halfway house in Spain, where they were weaned off the Valium their owners had used to keep them under control. Already, she is the leader of this little group.
He don't like them up there, does he?
Humans are fascinated by chimpanzees, perhaps because we recognize so many of our own gestures and expressions in their behavior. At Monkey World, the young chimps stare equally curiously at their human visitors. Like all great apes, the chimp's snub nose reveals that they have lost smell as the dominant sense, and that, like us, sight, sound and touch are by far the most important senses. They have ways of attracting attention if they think they are being ignored. Visiting children need to explore the discovery that they are nearly as agile as their newfound cousins, as well as sharing most of their genes and all of their curiosity. In the nursery, this young chimp is already finding a use for small stones. The young chimps will eventually graduate from the nursery to one of the senior communities. In the oldest group, Paddy is the dominant male. He survived 5 years as a beach chimp before being rescued, and took 4 years to become dehumanized and integrated into the group of 8, which he now rules with a firm hand. These chimps have been together for 7 years. They live exactly as if they were in the wild, augmenting their supplied diet with snakes and rabbits, which they hunt as a team. The youngest members of Monkey World were born at Windsor Safari Park just before it closed. Here they will grow up into a community which, while it is not completely natural, is protected and safe, and above all, a proper chimpanzee society. Supported by their close relatives at the top of the family tree, they might be the last generation of chimpanzees to live in captivity.